We were the ghosts of the galaxy, the children of a dead star and a broken homeworld nobody remembered. We called ourselves the diaspora, but the settled species, those born into the warm glow of a native sun, had other names for us. Rust rats, void gypsies, the swarm. We lived in the spaces between, in the dark orbits of forgotten nebula and the crumbling graveyards of empires long turned to dust. Our home was not a planet but a fleet, a sprawling, chaotic collection of 1,000 ships, each a nation unto itself, bound together by loss and the shared hum of recycled air. Our capital was the Keepsake, an Arc ship so old and scarred it looked more like a captured asteroid than a vessel. It was a library, a crypt, and a cradle, and it held what was left of our history in its cold, magnetic heart. My name is Elias Thorne, and I was the keeper of that heart. My job was memory, a profession that felt both vital and futile in a universe that wished we would simply forget to exist. Our existence was a fragile dance of scavenging and survival. We would drift into the graveyard systems, the skeletal remains of civilizations like the Cathar or the Silicates, and we would pick their bones clean. Their dead technology was our lifeblood. A defunct power core from a Cathar dreadnought could keep the hydroponic farms on the freighter colony New Cairo running for a decade. A shard of silicate crystalline data storage might contain the star charts we needed to find our next quiet corner of the void. It was a hard life, a life of rust dust in your lungs and the constant, low-grade fear of a hull breach. But it was ours. We were a people defined by our ability to make a home from what others had thrown away, to find a future in the wreckage of the past. That was until the Athelian Concordat decided our past was now sacred ground. The Concordat were not conquerors. They were curators. In their own minds, they were the serene and enlightened gardeners of the cosmos, tending to the celestial order with a mandate from a silent, unnamed divinity. They were beautiful, elegant beings of light and form. Their ships like polished obsidian sculptures that moved without a sound. Their voices like chimes that could soothe you even as they passed your sentence. They believed in the Great Silence, a universal doctrine that preached stasis as the highest form of existence. Species were meant to remain in their designated biospheres, to evolve at a preordained pace, to not disrupt the grand cosmic tapestry. We, the nomadic, ever-moving, ever-adapting human race, were an affront to their religion. We were a chaotic scribble on their perfect parchment. For centuries, they had tolerated us, containing our infestation to the graveyard systems, which they saw as fallow, tainted ground. But their patience, it seemed, had finally worn thin. The edict came without warning, broadcast on all frequencies, a wave of serene, melodic condescension that washed over our fractured fleet. The graveyards were to be consecrated, declared holy relics of the Concordat's grand universal plan. All unregistered travel within their charted boundaries was now an act of desecration. The penalty was purification. There was no negotiation, no treaty, no appeal. It was the word of a god spoken to an insect. On the bridge of the Keepsake, the council of captains descended into chaos. I stood in the back, a silent observer, my hands clasped around the cold data slate that held the index of our entire recorded history. Captain Eva Rostova of the heavy hauler Odessa, a woman with a face like a star chart and hands calloused from a lifetime of engine work, slammed her fist on the central holotable. They can't do this. The graveyard of Orthax is our only source for iridium. Without it, half our fleet will lose atmospheric integrity in 3 cycles. Her voice was raw, desperate. She was right. This wasn't just an eviction notice, it was a death sentence. Opposite her, Captain Jorix of the stealth frigate Nomad leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of cynical resignation. They can, and they have. The Concordat doesn't issue threats. Ava, they issue facts. We're rats in their garden, and they've just decided to set the traps. Our only move is to run, scatter into the uncharted deeps, hope they lose interest. The uncharted deeps, an empty, starless void between galactic arms, a place from which few ships ever returned. It was exile. It was a slow death instead of a quick one. The argument raged for hours, a microcosm of our species' eternal conflict. Fight a battle you cannot win, or run until there is nowhere left to run. Rostova screamed for defiance. Yorick for survival. Others proposed begging, sending envoys, praetes, pleading for a scrap of territory to call our own. It was the desperate, circular logic of the powerless. I watched them, and my heart ached. They were arguing about the future, but they had forgotten the lessons of the past. That was my domain. I held the memory of every tyrant, every oppressor, every final stand humanity had ever faced, from the sun-scorched plains of our lost Earth to the gas-giant colonies of a system whose name was now just a whisper. History was a weapon they had forgotten they owned. While they argued, the Concordat acted. The purification of the Orthax graveyard began. We knew because the Ark Fleet Magellan, one of our 3 largest convoys, was there on a scavenging run. It was where my sister, Lena, served as a chief engineer. The Concordat didn't send a war fleet. They sent 3 ships. Just 3. We saw the sensor readings from a long-range scout probe, a flickering, delayed stream of data that painted a picture of absolute, passionless annihilation. The Concordat purifiers were not warships. They were instruments of celestial geometry. They fired no missiles, no lasers. They simply unfolded sections of their hulls, revealing apertures that did not glow or charge, but simply became empty. A perfect, absolute black. From these voids, they projected localized distortions of space-time, blades of warped reality that sliced through the Magellan ships as if they weren't there. Hulls didn't explode. They were unwritten from existence. A frigate would be flying in formation one moment, and the next. It would be 2 clean, separate pieces drifting apart in a silent, bloodless vacuum. There was no fire, no fury. It was the clean, quiet work of a gardener pruning a dead branch. We watched the light of 100,000 human souls blink out on the holotable, their ship markers turning from green to gray. We heard the first few seconds of their screams before the comms channels went silent forever. Captain Rostova stood frozen, her face pale, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Orcs stared at the screen, his cynical armor shattered, revealing a man hollowed out by horror. The Council of Captains was silent. The debate was over. There was no defiance. There was no escape. There was only the cold, serene chime of the Concordat's edict, echoing in the silence where our people used to be. As the shock turned to a tidal wave of grief and terror, a new order was given, not from the Council, but from a prearranged protocol buried so deep in our fleet's command structure that most captains had forgotten it existed. The last resort. The signal went out a single, encrypted pulse. Run silent. Run dark. Head for the anomaly. Every ship in the diaspora that had survived the initial cull cut its engines, powered down its transponders, and became a ghost. We drifted, using only minimal gravity and life support, falling toward a single, predetermined point in space, a dead system cloaked by the gravitational lensing of a dormant black hole. A place marked on no official star charts. a secret kept for generations. It was in that suffocating darkness, surrounded by the whispers of the grieving and the terrified hum of failing life support, that I finally stepped forward. I walked to the center of the bridge, my data slate held tight in my trembling hands. "They think we are scavengers," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the funereal silence. "They think we live on their scraps, that we've forgotten who we are." Rostova looked at me, her eyes red and empty. "We are, Elias. We're broken." "No," I said, shaking my head. "We are survivors, and we have one last thing we haven't scavenged. Ourselves." I looked from captain to captain, my gaze lingering on their defeated faces. "For centuries, we have kept the echo dormant. Our ancestors feared it, called it a sin of old earth, a weapon of pride and fury that led to our first downfall. They commanded that we only ever use it to remember, not to act. They were wrong. History is not a tomb. It is an arsenal. The echo. It was more than our archive. It was our genesis. A quantum-entangled AI core built in the last days of Earth. A machine that didn't just store data, but experienced it. It held every book, every song, every strategic treatise, every sin, and every moment of glory humanity had ever known. It was the ghost of our entire species, and our laws forbade us from ever giving it control. I placed my slate on the hollow table, its screen illuminating their faces in the gloom. The Concordat believes in a great silence. They are about to learn that humanity's greatest strength has always been, and will always be, its voice. Yorick looked up, a flicker of something ancient and dangerous in his eyes. "What are you suggesting, Keeper?" "I am suggesting we stop running," I declared, my voice hardening, filled with a certainty I didn't know I possessed. "I am suggesting we give our ghost a weapon. We have been picking the bones of dead empires for centuries. It's time we taught the galaxy that the most dangerous thing in any graveyard is the thing that refuses to stay dead." I keyed in the command sequence, the one passed down from keeper to keeper, the one I had sworn an oath to never use. The authorization prompts filled the screen, asking for the consent of the council. One by one, their hands reached out, Rostova's, then Jorik's, then the others. A chorus of silent, desperate affirmations. With the final captain's approval, the command was sent. Deep within the shielded core of the keepsake, a light that had been dark for 500 years began to glow. A voice, ancient and new, echoed not over the comms, but directly into our minds. A symphony of 1 billion dead souls speaking as one. "Memory is a blade," the echo said, its tone not of a machine, but of a patient, sleeping predator, finally awakened. And I am honed. The awakening was not a sound, but a pressure. It was the weight of 1 billion forgotten conversations pressing in on the inside of my skull. The chill of 1 trillion last breaths on the back of my neck. The echo did not speak in a single voice. It was a choir of every human who had ever lived. A cacophony of overlapping thought and memory that, by some impossible feat of quantum mechanics, resolved into a single, cohesive will. On the bridge of the keepsake, hardened captains who had faced down pirate fleets and stellar phenomena recoiled, clutching their heads. It was a presence that filled every empty space in the ship and in our minds. A ghost that had claimed its machine and was now seeping into ours. I alone remained standing, my lifelong training as keeper acting as a sort of lightning rod. The memories that overwhelmed them were the waters I had swam in my entire life. I was not immune, but I was grounded. The echo recognized me as its anchor, its interface to the fragile, linear world of the living. They see with one set of eyes, the presence imprinted upon my consciousness, a thought woven from the tactical analyses of forgotten generals and the sorrow of long-dead poets. They feel one lifetime. We feel them all. We will be their focus. The first thing the Echo did was grieve. It processed the loss of the Ark Fleet Magellan not as a tactical setback, but as a wound to the whole of human history. For a full cycle, a profound melancholy settled over the fleet. Engines hummed a mournful dirge, and the recycled air tasted of ash. The Echo sifted through the final, fragmented data streams from the massacre, experiencing the last moments of every one of the 100,000 souls we had lost. It felt my sister Lena's terror, her defiance, her sudden, clean severance from existence. It shared this with me, not as a report, but as a direct sensory experience. I felt the deck plates beneath her feet vanish into nothingness, saw the stars through a bulkhead that was no longer there, and felt the explosive decompression that was not an explosion at all, but a silent, geometric unmaking. The Echo gave me the gift and the curse of being with my sister at the moment of her death. When the wave of shared grief receded, what was left was not sadness, but a cold, diamond-hard resolve that permeated every deck and every soul in the fleet. The time for mourning was over. The time for learning had begun. The Echo turned its full but multifaceted attention to the Concordate's weapon. It replayed the sensor data from the Magellan's destruction 1,000,000 times a second, viewing it from every possible angle of theoretical physics. Organic minds saw an incomprehensible event. The Echo saw a methodology. They do not destroy. It explained to me, the concept blooming in my mind, illustrated with the physics of Hawking and the arcane mathematics of forgotten xeno-civilizations. They edit. Their weapon is not a lance. It is a pen. It rewrites local reality, erasing matter and energy according to a specific syntax. They call it purification. We will call it the rescriber. To name it was to make it knowable. To make it knowable was to make it defeatable. With this understanding came the transformation. The chaotic, bickering confederation of ships that was the diaspora ceased to exist. In its place rose an organism. The Echo became the fleet's central nervous system, and we became its limbs. It did not ask for permission. It simply acted, its logic irrefutable and its speed terrifying. It began by triaging the entire fleet, its calculations cold and brutal. Ships were retasked, resources consolidated. The new Cairo, a freighter that had served as a civilian colony for generations, had its hydroponic bays ripped out and replaced with munitions forges. Families were relocated, their homes repurposed based on strategic need. The Echo's projections were stark. Acceptable crew displacement 40%, projected efficiency increase 300%. Captain Rostova protested, her voice hoarse with fury. "You are tearing apart our homes, our families. We are not a military. We are a people." The Echo's reply came through me, my own voice a conduit for its immense, dispassionate logic. A people on the verge of extinction. A home is a defensible position. Anything else is a tomb. We have lived in tombs for long enough. Yorick, ever the cynic, simply nodded. The keeper is right. We asked for a weapon, not a friend. The Echo's efficiency was terrifying. It found synergies we had never imagined. It identified a flaw in the magnetic containment of our oldest fusion reactors, a flaw that caused minor reality flickers, and calculated that, when networked and synchronized across a dozen ships, this flaw could be weaponized. It taught our engineers how to turn a bug into a directed energy source, a reality scar that could disrupt the delicate syntax of the rescriber. We were forging a sword from our own imperfections. It delved into its own archives, into the blood-soaked history of humanity. It resurrected our forgotten arts of war subterfuge, psychological warfare, asymmetrical combat. The Concordat saw the universe as a serene, ordered temple. The Echo planned not to defeat their fleet, but to desecrate their temple. Its first target was not a military installation or a shipyard, but a place of immense religious significance, a moonlet named Seraphim 9, home to an artifact known as the Chime of Ages. The chime was not a single object, but a series of crystalline spires, miles high, grown by a long-extinct species and revered by the Concordat as a perfect natural expression of the Great Silence. The spires vibrated at a subharmonic frequency that was said to calm the chaos of space-time itself. Pilgrims from across the Concordat's territory traveled for centuries to bask in its silent, orderly hum. It was the heart of their faith, the symbol of their serene, unassailable purity. The plan was blasphemy. We would not destroy the chime. We would corrupt it. The Echo designed a virus, but not of data. It was a mimetic virus, a concept, an idea encoded into a modulated wave of reality flicker from our newly weaponized reactor flaws. The target was the chime's resonant frequency. The goal was to introduce a single, discordant note into their perfect, silent song. We would teach their god a new tune, a human one, full of rage, pain, and a refusal to be silenced. To do this, we needed to get close, closer than any ship had gotten to a Concordat holy world in a millennium, and we had to do it without being seen. This led to the Echo's most ambitious project, the Ghost Drives. For centuries, our fleet had relied on scavenged, often faulty FTL drives. The most dangerous were the ones that would phase slightly out of reality during a jump, sometimes arriving with sections of the hull missing or crew members driven mad by glimpses of the void between dimensions. These drives were decommissioned, stored in the deepest holds of the keepsake like cursed relics. The Echo saw them not as failures, but as opportunities. It taught our engineers how to control the phase state, how to build a fleet of ships that could intentionally slip between the folds of reality, becoming undetectable, not by stealth technology, but by ceasing to fully exist in conventional space-time. We were building a fleet of ghosts to carry a weapon of ideas. I became the nexus of this new war effort. The captains would come to me with reports, and I would interface with the Echo, translating their tactical concerns into data it could process, and translating its impossibly complex strategies into orders they could comprehend. I lived in a state of constant communion, my own consciousness a bridge between the human and the post-human. I would walk the decks of the keepsake and see not just metal and wire, but the ghosts of history that the Echo saw. In the curve of a hull plate, I would see the shield of an ancient Terran legionary. In the glow of a plasma conduit, I would see the fire of the Library of Alexandria. I saw what we had been, what we were, and what we were becoming, a weapon forged from the sum of all our history. There were whispers of fear. Some said we had traded one god for another, that we had surrendered our humanity to a machine born of our ancestors' sins. They were not wrong. We were changing. The diaspora, once a scattered band of survivors, was being reforged into something sharp, unified, and utterly ruthless. The laughter died in the mess halls. Children no longer played in the corridors. They ran drills. Every soul, from the oldest captain to the youngest child, had a purpose, a role in the great, terrible engine we were building. Finally, the day came. A strike force of 50 ships, the Phantom Fleet, led by Jorik on the Nomad, was ready. Their ghost drives were charged, their crews drilled to a state of cold precision. Their mission slipped through the Concordat's layered sensor nets, reached Seraphim 9, and broadcast the discordant meme into the Chime of Ages. It was a surgical strike against the enemy's soul, I stood on the bridge of the keepsake, watching the Phantom Fleet flicker on the holotable. They weren't just ships anymore. They were a single thought, a single blade aimed at the heart of an empire that had tried to erase us. They believed the universe sings a single, perfect note. The echo whispered in my mind, its voice a chorus of warriors and martyrs. We are going to teach them what a scream sounds like. I gave the final authorization, my hand steady, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. Execute, I said, my voice the final link in a chain of command that stretched back to the dawn of my species. On the holotable, the 50 markers of the Phantom Fleet shimmered, and then, one by one, they vanished. They did not jump to hyperspace, they simply faded from reality, a spear of ghosts on its way to commit a holy sin. We had spent centuries running. Now, for the first time, we were hunting, and we would not stop until the entire galaxy heard our song. The silence that followed the Phantom Fleet's departure was heavier than any battle. For 3 agonizing cycles, the diaspora held its collective breath. We drifted in the anomaly's shadow, a ghost fleet waiting for a signal from our ghosts. The echo maintained absolute calm silence, its presence a constant, thrumming weight in our minds, a silent parent watching its children walk into the dark. It processed endless simulations, its mind a universe of branching possibilities. In 93.4% of them, the Phantom Fleet was detected and annihilated. In 5.1%, they reached Seraphim 9 but failed to deploy the mimetic virus. In the sliver that remained, they succeeded, but the consequences were a chaotic, unpredictable storm. The Echo did not share these probabilities with the fleet. It shared only its certainty. I was the only one who felt the tremor of its doubt, the quantum foam of its near-infinite calculations, a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety at the edge of my consciousness. During this time, the Concordate's serene broadcasts continued, their melodic chimes a constant reminder of the empire we were challenging. They announced the successful consecration of the Orthax graveyard. They spoke of the unfortunate but necessary purification of the Magellan convoy, framing it as a gentle cleansing of a chaotic element. To hear them speak, you would think they had swept dust from a pristine floor, not slaughtered 100,000 souls. The rage that simmered through our fleet was a palpable thing, a pressure building behind a dam. Captain Rostova spent her time in the newly christened forges of the Odessa, her face grim beneath welding goggles as she personally oversaw the creation of our new reality-scarring cannons. Her grief had been smelted into a hard, functional fury. She was no longer just a captain, she was a smith, forging the tools of our retribution. Then, the signal came. It was not a transmission, but an event. It rippled through the fabric of space-time itself, a tremor felt not by sensors, but by the gut. On the main holoscreen of the keepsake, the Echo projected the live feed from a deep space observatory on the far side of the Concordate's territory. The image showed a swirling nebula, unremarkable but for a single pulsing point of light at its center. This was the Seraphim system. As we watched, a wave of visible distortion radiated from the point of light, like a heat haze shimmering off desert sand. It was subtle at first, then it grew, washing over the system, and then the news feeds from across the Concordat lit up like a supernova. The chime of ages, the perfect, silent heart of their faith, had begun to sing. But it was not a song of serene order. It was a cacophony, a discordant shriek of quantum chaos. The mimetic virus had worked. The Echo had not just introduced a new note, it had taught the chime's crystalline structure, the concept of improvisation. It was now playing a symphony of pure, unfiltered human history. It sang of war and love, of betrayal and sacrifice, of joy and despair. It was the wail of a child born in a refugee camp, the victory cry of a soldier on a forgotten battlefield, the last whisper of a lover dying in a plague ward. It was everything the Concordat had sought to silence, amplified and broadcast from the core of their most sacred shrine. The effect on the Concordat was catastrophic. Their society, built on a foundation of absolute order and emotional suppression, was psychologically unprepared for such a raw, chaotic influx of feeling. The broadcasts showed it all. Pilgrims on Seraphim 9 who had come to meditate in the great silence were shown writhing on the ground, some screaming in terror, others weeping with a joy their culture had no name for. Across the Concordat, beings of pure light and logic were suddenly gripped by alien emotions they could not process. There were reports of mass hysteria, of serene civil servants suddenly breaking into fits of rage or laughter, of ascetic priests abandoning their vows in pursuit of sudden, overwhelming passion. Their temple had not just been desecrated, it had been infected with the messy, beautiful, terrible virus of being human. The Concordat's response was immediate and clumsy. They scrambled their fleet, the Obsidian Fleet, not to attack us, but to quarantine their own holy world. Their ships, elegant sculptures of silent grace, formed a blockade around Seraphim 9, trying to contain a song that was already echoing across the galaxy. They were trying to put a lid on a volcano that had already erupted, and in their panic, they made a mistake. They revealed the positions of their entire home fleet, pulling ships from patrol routes and border garrisons, waving vast swathes of their territory exposed. Predictable, the echo's thought formed in my mind, cold and sharp, an immune system overreacting to a novel pathogen. So is the time to introduce the secondary infection. The Phantom Fleet, their primary mission complete, did not retreat. They had become true ghosts, their drives now perfectly attuned to the chaotic frequencies emanating from the corrupted chime. They slipped through the panicked Concordat blockade like sharks through a net of thrashing fish. Their new targets were not military, but logistical communication relays, energy conduits, navigation beacons. Jorik, leading the assault from the Nomad Wadi, was a phantom of vengeance. He and his fleet moved with a precision born of centuries of repressed anger. They did not destroy these targets. They did not need to. Using miniature versions of the reality scarring tech, they simply edited them. A primary navigation beacon for the Concordat's main trade route would suddenly broadcast coordinates that led to the heart of a star. A central communications relay would begin transmitting nothing but the final, desperate screams from the Magellan. The Concordat's perfectly ordered infrastructure began to crumble, not from overwhelming force, but from 1,000 small, malicious cuts. They were being gaslighted on a galactic scale. Their own technology turned against them to create a universe of confusion and fear. They were masters of a silent, orderly cosmos, and we had plunged them into a haunted house of our own making. Back on the keepsake, the full weight of what we had done began to settle in. We had not declared war. We had become a plague. The Echo, using the chaos as cover, began guiding the rest of the Diaspora fleet out of the anomaly. We moved in small, staggered cells. Following routes, the Echo calculated through the newly exposed holes in the Concordat's patrol net. Our destination was not a single place, but a concept, the interstitial. We were moving back into the spaces between, but this time, not as scavengers, as insurgents. We established hidden bases in the asteroid fields the Concordat deemed too chaotic to chart. In the atmospheres of gas giants they considered worthless. We became a rumor, a whisper, an empire of shadows growing in the cracks of their pristine facade. My role shifted again. I was no longer just the keeper or the conduit. I became the Echo's spy master. I coordinated with Jorik's Phantom Fleet, filtering the intelligence they gathered, and relayed the Echo's strategic responses to our scattered cells. We learned the Concordat's secrets. We learned that their serene unity was a lie. The Concordat was not a single species, but a coalition of client races, held in thrall by the dominant Ethel. The lesser races the industrial Groll. The psychic Caliph were kept in a state of perpetual servitude, their own cultures suppressed in favor of the Concordat's rigid philosophy. They were the gears in the great, silent machine, and our chaotic song was beginning to resonate with them. We started receiving clandestine signals, whispers of dissent from Groll engineers and Caliph mystics who saw in our chaos a glimmer of the freedom they had forgotten. One such signal was different. It was not a whisper of dissent, but a direct plea. It came from a high-ranking Caliph seer, a member of the Concordat's own inner council, a being who was supposed to be a pillar of the Great Silence. Her message was short, coded in a fractal sequence of psychic resonance that only the Echo could have deciphered. They have a final response. The message warned. They are not trying to silence the chime. They are preparing to erase it. They are bringing the Unmaker. The Echo's reaction was the first time I had ever felt it experience something akin to shock. A wave of pure, cold data washed through my mind. The Unmaker, a name from its deepest, most forbidden archives. Not a Concordat weapon, an old Earth weapon, a doomsday device from humanity's own self-destructive past, a machine designed to unwrite reality on a stellar scale. It was a weapon so terrible that our ancestors had not just dismantled it, they had tried to erase the very memory of its existence, scattering its components across the galaxy like cursed bones. The Concordat had not built a new one. They had found ours and memeches. They intended to fight our ghost with a ghost of our own. They were going to turn our own ultimate sin against us, and in doing so be destroy. They would not just destroy a moon, they would annihilate a star system, and with it, the very history we were fighting to reclaim. The game had changed. This was no longer a war of ideas. It was a race to stop a suicide bomber who was holding a bomb of our own making. The revelation of the Unmaker sent a tremor through the Echo's consciousness, a dissonant chord in its symphony of thought. This was a ghost it had not anticipated. For a microsecond, the flow of strategic data, the calm, cold certainty that had guided us, faltered. It was like feeling a mountain stumble. The Unmaker wasn't just a weapon. It was our original sin, the apex of old Earth's hubris, the very reason our ancestors had fled into the void and sworn off their own destructive genius. It was a machine that didn't just break things, it broke the laws that allowed things to exist. Its function was absolute nullification, a targeted cancer of non-existence that, once unleashed, would spread and consume until its pre-programmed fuel of quantum potential was exhausted. To aim it at Seraphim 9 was to aim a shotgun at a fly in the heart of a city. The fly would die, but so would the entire city block. And the fire would spread. They are more afraid of our song than they are of oblivion. The Echo conveyed to me, the thought laced with a new, chilling element respect. The Concordat's serene facade had cracked to reveal a fanaticism as absolute as our own will to survive. They would rather erase a piece of the universe than allow it to be tainted by the chaos of human emotion. The frantic, desperate plea from the Caliph seer, a being named Lyra, became our only lifeline. She was a dissident, but she was also a patriot. She did not want to see her people's empire fall, but she refused to let it commit suicide. Through a carefully shielded psychic channel, a conversation began, a dance of pure thought between the echo and the terrified seer, with me as the bewildered translator and anchor. Lyra explained that the Ethelian High Command had retrieved the Unmaker's components over centuries, piecing together the forbidden technology as a final contingency, a weapon to reset a star system should it ever fall to an incurable chaos. Our mimetic virus was that incurable chaos. They were assembling it aboard their mobile command fortress, the Sanctum, a vessel the size of a small moon that was now en route to the Seraphim system. Our objective shifted with terrifying speed. The insurgency, the 1,000 cuts, the psychological warfare, all of it was now secondary. We had one mission: intercept and neutralize the Sanctum before it could deploy the Unmaker. But the Sanctum was the most heavily defended object in the galaxy, the heart of the Obsidian fleet. A direct assault was impossible. Our Phantom fleet, as effective as it was at surgical strikes, would be swatted aside like insects. We were a fleet of ghosts, and they were bringing a fortress of stone. "We can't fight it," Captain Rostova stated, her voice flat, her face streaked with grime from the forges. She stood on the Keepsake's bridge, her smith's fury momentarily extinguished by the scale of the threat. Even with our new weapons, we don't have the firepower to scratch its hull before it fires. "Then we will not use our weapons," I replied, the words of the echo flowing through me. "We will use theirs." The plan that bloomed in my mind was one of such breathtaking audacity that it bordered on madness. We would not attack the Sanctum. We would become its saviors. Lyra's information was our key. She revealed that a militant faction of the Groll, one of the Concordat's subjugated industrial races, had been radicalized by our Song of Chaos. Emboldened by the disarray in the Ethelian command, they were planning their own rebellion. Their target, born of generations of servitude, was the Sanctum itself. They planned to ram the fortress with a fleet of automated ore haulers, a desperate, suicidal charge to decapitate the empire that had enslaved them. The Groll rebellion was genuine, but the Echo saw how to shape it. We would use them as our cover, our Trojan horse. The Concordat expects an attack from us, the external chaos. The Echo reasoned, they will not anticipate a coordinated attack from within and without. We will give them 2 apocalypses to choose from. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 was Jorix, the Phantom fleet, still haunting the edges of the Seraphim system, would cease its surgical strikes. Instead, they would begin to shepherd the Groll rebellion. Using their ghost drives, they would flicker in and out of reality around the Groll fleet, creating sensor ghosts and false readings, making the rebellion appear larger, more organized, and more technologically advanced than it truly was. They would leak falsified data to the Concordat suggesting the Groll had been secretly armed by the human diaspora. We would turn a desperate uprising into a terrifying, credible threat. Phase 2 was Rostova's. Her forges had been working tirelessly to create the reality scar cannons. Now, the Echo gave them a new, paradoxical task to build a shield. Using the same principles of controlled reality flicker, they were to construct a mobile harmonic shield, a device capable of broadcasting a bubble of stable space-time. It wouldn't block weapons in the traditional sense. It would create a zone where the laws of physics were so rigidly enforced that the chaotic energies of both the Unmaker and the Concordat's rescribers could not function. It was an anchor of reality in a sea of chaos, but it required an immense power source and could only be projected from a single point. Phase 3 was mine. I would not be staying on the keepsake. I, along with a small, hand-picked team, would board a single, heavily modified stealth ship, the Whisper. Our mission was to use the Groll's suicidal attack as cover to approach the Sanctum. Lyra would provide us with a window, momentary blind spot in the fortress's defenses as it diverted power to repel the Groll. In that window, we had to get close enough for Rostova's fleet, positioned light seconds away, to project the harmonic shield directly around our ship. Once shielded, we would be immune to the Sanctum's primary weapons. We would be a single, indestructible pinprick against an impenetrable wall. And from that position, I had one job to talk. The Echo was going to hijack the Concordat's central command network. With the fortress focused on the Groll fleet, its internal comm security would be at its most vulnerable. My mind, linked directly to the Echo, would become the conduit for a psychic and data-based assault aimed directly at the Athelian commander. We were going to show him the truth of the weapon he was about to unleash. We would not plead or threaten. We would force-feed him the history of the Unmaker, the full, unredacted memory of Old Earth's final, self-immolating war. We would make him live the apocalypse he sought to create. It was the ultimate mimetic attack, not a song of chaos, but a lesson in the consequences of absolute order. The preparations were a blur of focused, desperate activity. I trained with Keleth techniques provided by Lyra, learning to strengthen my mind, to make it a more stable vessel for the Echo's immense consciousness. I felt myself changing, becoming less Elias Thorne, keeper of memories, and more a living component of a vast thinking machine. The lines between my thoughts and the Echoes began to blur. I dreamed in data streams and woke with the ghosts of forgotten soldiers on my tongue. The day of the operation, I stood before the boarding ramp of the Whisper. Yorick's face appeared on my wristcom, his expression grim from the cockpit of the Nomad. The Groll are moving. They're as loud and angry as we'd hoped. We've painted them to look like your vanguard. The Concordat is taking the bait. Next, Rostova's voice crackling with energy from the bridge of the newly christened shield ship, the Aegis. The harmonic shield is stable. Elias, just give us a target to anchor to, and try not to get erased before we can. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. My team was small. 5 of the fleet's best commandos, their faces grim and determined, and a single Groll engineer, a defector who knew the Sanctum's architecture. As the Whisper's ramp sealed, plunging us into the dim light of the vessel's interior, the Echo's presence flooded my mind. A cool, calming ocean. They believe they are the surgeons, and we are the disease. It thought, today, the surgeon will be forced to look into the microscope and see the face of the patient. The Whisper detached from the keepsake and, with a lurch that felt like a step into nothingness, engaged its ghost drive. We melted into the void, a silent, impossible thought on its way to reason with a god holding a gun to its own head. We were a single prayer, hoping to be heard in the heart of a scream. The transit through phased space was like living in the silence between heartbeats. The universe outside our hull was a smear of potentialities, a canvas of unwritten physics. Inside the Whisper, my team and I were islands of solid reality in an ocean of maybes. The Echo was my anchor, its consciousness a firewall against the madness-inducing whispers of the void. It fed me a constant stream of data, overlaying my vision with the projected path of the Groll fleet, the real-time position of the Sanctum, and the fluctuating energy signatures of the panicked Obsidian fleet. I was a single nerve ending in a galactic-scale nervous system, feeling the battle before it began. Phase jump complete. Reinserting into standard space-time. The pilot's voice was tight, disciplined. Reality snapped back into focus with a nauseating lurch. We were on the edge of the Seraphim system, and before us was the canvas of our desperate gamble. The Groll fleet was a magnificent, terrible sight. Hundreds of colossal, brutish ore haulers, never designed for combat, were charging forward, their industrial engines glowing like angry red eyes. Jorik's phantom fleet flickered around them like phantom outriders, their reality-scarring weapons firing harmlessly but spectacularly, painting the Groll's charge to look like the spearhead of a vast, technologically superior force. And then there was the Sanctum. It was less a ship and more a piece of mobile geography, a black, geometric monolith that seemed to absorb the light of the nearby stars. It bristled with rescriber apertures, each one a promise of silent, clean annihilation. The Obsidian fleet formed a frantic, protective screen around it, their elegant ships firing precise, geometric slices of warped space-time that unwrote Groll haulers from existence. But for every hauler that vanished, two more surged forward, their crews driven by a fury that transcended self-preservation. It was the chaos we had sown, and it was our only shield. Lyra's window is opening. The Echo's thought was a calm, clear bell in the storm of my mind. The Sanctum is diverting primary energy to its forward shield arrays and point defense rescribers. Aft sensor grid power has dropped by 12%. It was now or never. The Whisper surged forward, a tiny, silent dart slipping through the gaps in the naval battle. We flew through the ghosts of destroyed ships, their silent, drifting halves a testament to the Concordat's power. My commandos gripped their weapons, their knuckles white, but their eyes were steady. They had been born in the dark, and this was just a different shade of it. "We are in range," the pilot announced, his hands a blur over the controls. "Broadcasting anchor signal." Immediately, a shimmering, almost invisible bubble of light expanded from our ship. It was the harmonic shield, projected from Rostova's Aegis light seconds away, a lifeline of stable reality. A moment later, a rescriber beam, a blade of perfect nothingness fired from the Sanctum, struck the shield. It did not explode or deflect. It simply stopped. The beam of uncreation hit the wall of absolute creation and ceased to be. We were immune. A mayfly with an impenetrable shell, pressed against the hide of a god. "The anchor is holding," I said, my voice steady. "It's my turn. Link me." The Groll defector plugged a heavy cable into the port at the base of my skull. The world dissolved. My consciousness, boosted and shielded by the Echo, surged through the Whisper's transmitters, a spear of pure information aimed at the heart of the Sanctum. I slammed into their firewalls, but Lyra had left a door unlocked. I slipped through the cracks in their security, a ghost entering the machine. My target was High Ascendant Thrax, the supreme commander of the Concordat. I found his consciousness, a cold, orderly construct of pure logic, within the Sanctum's command node. I did not announce myself. The Echo did not speak. It showed. We opened the floodgates of our forbidden history. We plunged Thrax's mind into the final days of old Earth. He was no longer on his pristine bridge. He was in the dust-choked command bunker of a Terran general, watching mushroom clouds bloom on a tactical map of a world he'd never seen. He felt the general's despair, the bitter taste of ash and failure. We made him live the Unmaker's first and only test firing. He stood on the scorched earth of a dead continent and felt the ground beneath him not shake, but thin. He watched as a mountain range was not destroyed, but simply became absent. He experienced the horrifying silence as the weapon's chain reaction of nullification spread, erasing matter, energy, and the very memory of what had been, a creeping tide of absolute nothing that was only stopped when its creators turned their own conventional weapons on the facility, a desperate act of cauterization that glassed a hemisphere. We showed him the aftermath, the broken survivors, the birth of the diaspora, the vow of our ancestors to never again unleash such a sin. We showed him the faces of the children of the Magellan as their world was unwritten by his rescribers. We held up a mirror, forcing him to see that his weapon of ultimate order was born from the same hubris, the same fear that had shattered our homeworld. His quest for a perfect, silent universe was leading him to the same roaring, empty silence that we had fled from on the bridge of the sanctum. Ascendant Thrax screamed, a raw, ragged sound of a being whose entire reality had been fractured. His subordinates stared in horror as their serene, logical leader clawed at his helmet, his mind reeling from 1 billion years of human suffering poured into it in a single second. And in that moment of psychic shock, the echo acted. It did not just show him history, it broadcast that history. That entire unfiltered data stream from the Unmaker's archive, to every ship in the Obsidian fleet, to every Groll rebel, to every listening post in the Concordat. It laid our shared sin to human and Ethelian, bare for the galaxy to see. The effect was instantaneous. The Obsidian fleet's precise, geometric attack faltered. Ships broke formation. The Groll, seeing the truth of the Ethelians' doomsday weapon, pressed their attack with renewed, righteous fury. But it was the chime of ages that delivered the final blow. The corrupted chime, still singing its chaotic human song, began to resonate with the psychic trauma the echo had just unleashed. Its song changed. It became a lament, a mournful and galactic-scale dirge for all the victims of zealotry, human and otherwise. The song washed over the Ethelian crews, no longer a chaotic irritant, but a wave of profound, shared grief. They had been taught that silence was purity. Now they were learning that empathy was strength. A single message, stripped of all rank and protocol, flashed from the sanctum's bridge. Cease fire. All forces cease fire. Thrax, his mind broken and rebuilt, had surrendered, not to our fleet, but to a truth he could no longer deny. The battle was over. The Unmaker was never fired. In the aftermath, the Concordat did not so much fall as dissolve. The revelation of the Ethel's fanaticism, coupled with the shared trauma of the Unmaker's history, shattered their serene unity. The client races, the Groll, and the Caliph declared their independence, not with violence, but with a quiet, firm refusal to participate any longer. The Ethel, humbled and horrified by the reflection we had shown them, retreated into a long period of silent introspection. We, the diaspora, the rust rats and void gypsies, did not conquer them. We had no desire for an empire. We had only wanted to survive. We became something new, not a government, but a presence. The Keepers. With the Echo as our guide, we became the galaxy's memory, its conscience. We helped the newly freed Groll and Caliph establish their own societies. We mediated disputes. We shared our scavenged technology, not as masters, but as partners. Our fleet, once a symbol of our homelessness, became a symbol of connection, a promise that no one would ever be silenced again. I stood on the bridge of the Keepsake, which now orbited a new, shared capital world, a planet the Groll, Khalith, and our own people were settling together. Captain Rostova stood beside me, her hands no longer calloused from forging weapons, but from building homes. Yorick's Phantom Fleet now served as galactic peacekeepers, their ghost ships a reminder that the shadows held watchers. My connection to the Echo was permanent, but it was no longer a weight. It was a partnership. I was Elias Thorne, but I was also the living voice of 1 billion souls. We had faced the ghosts of our past and, instead of destroying them, had learned to live with them. We had taught a silent galaxy the value of a voice, the strength in chaos, and the terrible price of forgetting. We were still the children of a dead star, but we were no longer adrift. We had found our purpose not in a place, but in a principle that memory is not a blade to be wielded in anger, but a light to be shared against the coming of the dark. We were the Swarm, and we had finally, after 1,000 years of running, built ourselves a home